Good evening and a very warm welcome on behalf of Milim. Welcome wherever you are in the UK and wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm pleased to welcome our viewers from across the globe. Our series of online talks and conversations continues with our guest, Shaul Adar. I'll introduce Shaul in just a moment. A little bit of housekeeping first. Please do ask questions. This is possible by typing whatever you'd like to ask into the Q&A facility on your screen. Hopefully we'll have some lively debate this evening. So as ever, we will do our best to get through as many of your questions as we can. Let me also draw your attention to the chat facility on your screen. This will allow you to send a message to all of the other participants on this webinar, should you wish to do so. And lastly, this event is being recorded. It will appear on our website at milim.org.uk in the next day or so. There you will find recordings of other past events, as well as details of our future programme for which you can book tickets. And so to our guest this evening. Shaul Adar is an acclaimed Israeli journalist and an expert on Israeli football. He writes for several football publications, including The Blizzard and When Saturday Comes. He's recently published On the Border, The Rise and Decline of the Most Political Football Club in the World. This is, of course, about Beitar Jerusalem. Shaul joins us from London. Just to say, we've got one or two technical issues this evening, so if his slides don't move quite as quickly as we'd like, let's apologise in advance. But Shaul, it's a pleasure to have you with us. So without further hesitation, over to you.
Hi, thanks for having me. If we can have the first slide, please. I'm not sure if you can see it. Yeah, not that one. Yeah. So this picture was taken about a week ago at the Beitar Jerusalem first training session of the season after they avoided relegation and avoiding getting into administration by the very last minute. The club was on the brink of almost relegation or extinction until a new owner came out and reached a very dodgy deal with the previous owner, somebody who's a suspect of business and tax fraud and some sexual misconduct. In this picture, we see the players of Beitar Jerusalem behind the sign of La Familia, the notorious ultras, the fan group of Beitar, which actually are responsible for the situation in which the club is. La Familia is becoming almost a cover name for a certain behavior. Benny Gantz, the Minister for Defense, pondered quite publicly a few months ago to put them in the list of terror organizations. And for many people, they are a terror organization, roaming the street of Jerusalem, hunting and chasing down anybody who doesn't fit into the ideology, and doing the same in football grounds as well, not just to rival supporters, but also for Beitar supporters who doesn't throw the line and dare to show some independent thinking. So in this picture, in this move, in this gesture, I think the line were drawn pretty clear. Beitar Jerusalem has given up the fight against La Familia, and it's under the spell, and they will make few calls and few decisions on behalf of the fans, although they represent just a part of the fanhood of Beitar. They are not part of the team owners or management or any official role, but they do call the shots. And by the shots, we mean the how they see the future of the club and the identity of the club. Since 2013, it is quite obvious that the policy of La Familia is a racist one and pretty nasty too. We'll get to this issue later, but it is since then and slightly before, it is a battle between some owners and some chairmen and many of the fans against La Familia. And it looks like they won the fight yet again. If we can see the other picture, please. Yeah, in my book, I tell the story of Beitar, how a small club from the periphery of British mandate and Palestine football became the major force of Israeli football in the late 90s, was on the verge of football domination, but since then declined steadily to the very poor situation in which it is today. The tagline is the rise and decline of the most political club in the world, which raised some anger and eyebrows. And you can say there are much more political clubs everywhere. In Glasgow, for example, both clubs are very political. In just this Saturday, I went to Forest Green Rovers and saw League One game under the flag of Palestine and very green issues and organizations. And you can say that Forest Green Rovers are much more political than Beitar. Every game is a political event. But the big difference is a small club from Gloucestershire. It's an anecdote. Nobody really gets too angry about it, apart from a terrible Israel Hayom newspaper, which we should really not take too seriously. But when Beitar goes into the full-blown racist mode, it makes headlines around the world. 2 years ago, when an UAE prince, quotation marks, was supposed to buy the club, you could read about it in most papers. And the news went around the world again, and there were demonstrations for and against it in Jerusalem. And while other clubs can keep on going with the racist agendas, in Beitar, when you act in Jerusalem, it is a big thing. It is important, and it is extremely political. If we can say the next one, please. Yeah. This picture was taken from Notre Dame Hostel, from the rooftop. If you know it, it's in the corner of Jaffa Street, just watching over the old city walls and the old city. And I'm sure most of you have been there in the old city, and there you can see it. It's just before the importance of the city is there. In that corner, the Battle of 1948 was almost lost by the Haganah fighters, and they had to ask for shelling of their own positions to stop the Jordanian army to march into West Jerusalem. From here, you can see the Rock of the Dome, the place where Jesus was buried, the major churches, and just beneath the Rock of the Dome, of course, is the Wailing Wall. So, and if we look much further, we can see the separation wall, what some people call the West Bank and settlements, the Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem and some of the post-1967 Israeli neighborhoods of Jerusalem. If we look from that point, we can see also the government buildings, the Knesset, the Mea Shearim, the Orthodox autonomy, and the neighborhood of Musrara. If we can move to the next picture. Yeah, this is from the old city, and the past is alive there. I'm not sure even if it's a past. You can feel the religion, emotions and tensions and the hate, mostly hate, and tourism, and it comes with consequences. In my book I wrote the city is cursed with holiness, and being such a holy place means that things never go easy. If there is an event, even the slightest one, even a few years ago, some kids on the light railways taunted each other and sometimes went into physical humiliation and posted it on TikTok. In a few days, it turned into a national conflict between Israeli and Palestinians. If Israel is wanting to replace the very poorly built bridge to Mount Temple, it is a big international issue with Jordan and Turkey and the Arab world. And of course, there's the situation with all the major Christian dominations fighting for each square mile between them. And next picture, please. And I took this picture of ultra Orthodox Jewish woman, I think, walking the street. Some people wrote to me that I shouldn't have taken this picture because it compromises privacy, but I'll take that risk, I'll live with it. You see all kinds of nutters out there in the street. Many wannabe Messiah, a lot of self-proclaimed Messiahs, and it's been there for at least 200 years. The city attracts people with mental health problem and then break them down. It's a well-known syndrome called Jerusalem syndrome. And in my book, I think we can speak about the Beitar Jerusalem syndrome. The club attracts owners and some fans that you wouldn't find in other places. And a city like Jerusalem can't produce a normal team. It's a team that touches madness and evoke hatred and passions much more than any other club. We all, as football fans, love our teams in very childish but consuming way. But with Beitar, it comes with a national emotion and representation. Beitar fans feel that they represent the Jewish people, the Jerusalem, although most of them don't live in Jerusalem, and the state of Israel. Next picture. And I started the book in this really beautiful and fascinating neighborhood of Musrara, which sits on the border, or the old border of the 1967, which between Jordan and Israel. It was exposed to snipers and some sniper shots, and most of the population was immigration from Arab and Muslim countries, what we know as Mizrahi Jews today. The city was built as a posh neighborhood for Jerusalemite Palestinian families who went out of the old city, and sits around the most beautiful part of Jerusalem, which is Haneviim Street, Prophet Street, where you can see many international influences, like this British St. Paul Cathedral, built like an Oxford church. There are some Italian compound and the notorious Russian compound, which is part of a big international dispute these days. And this is Jerusalem, or I recommend always visiting the Ethiopian church nearby. And on just few meters from the Ethiopian church is the Mea Shearim ultra-Orthodox autonomy. And by autonomy, I mean that they're supposed to live under Israeli rules, but they got their freedom, and they got their own economical system and mainly educational system. And it does influence the team as well in the end, as we shall see. So in this little beautiful place, we have a Mizrahi population lived in terrible, dire conditions from 1948 until the 80s, when a social revolution took place. Mizrahi anger bubbled. There is the proximity to Arab East Jerusalem and the neighboring ultra-Orthodox. It all's in the DNA of the city and the DNA of Beitar. Last picture, please. Yeah. Beitar started as a youth and sport club of the revisionist movement, the right-wing movement that became later Herut and then Likud in the early 70s. Surprisingly, or not many people know that, Beitar was supposed to be a liberal organization with big importance to civil rights and treating the Arab people of this part of the world in honor and coexistence. But as early as 1929, they were involved in the spark that led to the riots of Tarpat, if you know, the first major violent incidents between Jews and Arabs under British rule. And many people see it as year zero of the conflict. Surprisingly, Beitar had to play against Arab teams all the way until 1948. Sport in Israel was belonged mainly to two organizations. Maccabi represented the bourgeois, the little wealthy, relatively of course, of Tel Aviv, and Hapoel later came to the picture, where the socialist Histadrut, the trade union sport movement of the Histadrut. Both were much more powerful than Beitar and run the show for many years. And every time that Beitar managed to have a strong team, in those years it was Beitar Tel Aviv, they put them aside. And with the case of Beitar Jerusalem, they were ostracized as a political organization and geographically as the center of the Zionist life at that time was in Tel Aviv and Haifa and all across the shore. So Beitar had to play with Arab teams, the St. George, Armenian teams, or some of the Jewish team, but were never part of the major Israeli football. And so they played the games in this wonderful, under this wonderful YMCA building. If you know, it's in David Street, just opposite of King David Hotel, watching the magnificent view of the old city. And next pictures, please. And this is the plaque on the YMCA. The British thought that football will be a tool of bringing people together. They gave balls and uniforms to many clubs around Jerusalem and Palestine, hoping that people will spend some energy on the football pitch and less on the fighting each other. As we know, it didn't work out. But still, EU people gave us organized football, like most of the world. The first champion was British police. Few British clubs, mainly Army, won the cup. And the basis of Israeli football were laid by the British. So thanks a lot for that. Beitar until 1948 was a small club, not very important in football-wise. And in 1947, the British ordered all Beitar organization to close down. So that was it for a while. In 1948, they regrouped and started playing in the lower leagues, and they had to share the city with Hapoel Jerusalem, which enjoyed the help of the Histadrut, and it made life hard, but extremely beneficial identity-wise. Hapoel were part of labor of the Mapai and later Avodah, Ma'arach, whatever name they are called. If you worked for the Histadrut, you had to support Hapoel, so, or at least not show that you support Beitar. And those years were the starts of the lines that we see. Socialists and the Histadrut people supported Hapoel Jerusalem, and more nationalistic followers of Menachem Begin choose Beitar. One of the main issues was the Mizrahi identity. People from Arab countries felt that they were disrespected, and especially on religious terms in the new secular state, and felt that their heritage and traditions and livelihood as well were compromised. And they were always second best to Ashkenazi and to people close to the system. It made life for Beitar pretty hard, but it proved pretty valuable in the 70s and since then. Hapoel were the best team in Jerusalem. Both teams were years behind the teams from Tel Aviv and the center. And but something was brewing up. Beitar became enjoyed the most passionate fandom. I spoke to some people who saw them in late 60s and spoke to Ehud Olmert, the former prime minister, who came from Binyamina to Jerusalem to study law. And by chance, he was a Hapoel Petach Tikva fan. By chance, he went to see Beitar play at the YMCA and won over by the passion of the crowd. And I heard it from many people. By passion, we can as well say violence. It was parcel of Beitar games. I read the official book with many paper clippings, and you can hear a line, The visitors' goalkeeper lost 2-2 during the game, which may have an effect over the result of the match, which for Beitar fans, it may be funny. For the goalkeeper, I guess it's not that funny. Late 60s and early 70s brought two huge riots. One in Bloomfield against Hapoel Tel Aviv, in which legend has it, a guy with a rifle stood on the goal line of Beitar Jerusalem and was nutmegged by Hapoel Tel Aviv superstar. Not sure it happened, but the wonderful stadium was trashed down, the goalposts were burned, and many people were beaten. The referee, an immigrant from Russia, was chased down by Beitar fans and pleaded for his life, and was told, go back to Russia. It's a pity that Hitler didn't finish the job with you. So I guess it's not just legends and myth or smear about Beitar reputation. Then in the early 70s, Beitar played against Hapoel Petach Tikva, which in the 60s were the best team, won 5 titles in a row in the semi-final of the cup. And that time, Beitar lost and fans stormed into the pitch, beat some players who lost their consciousness and chased other players, this time we know for a fact with Uzi machine guns. So that was Beitar, passionate or violent, but with big following, but still not a major part of Israeli football. The big change came in 1976 when the club won its first state cup near Tel Aviv and stood up on the national stage for the first time. A year later, Menachem Begin and the Likud won the elections for the first time, and he became the prime minister. And some people saw it as an omen, or maybe it contributed to Begin's victory. Spoke to Olmert about it, and he quoted Begin, who said that they would have voted for me anyway. But on symbolic level, it's pretty obvious that the two events are connected. On Israeli football, the major Israeli sport, Beitar, the periphery, as well with Hapoel Be'er-Sheva, the champions, actually I should say, we Hapoel Be'er-Sheva, the champions that season, became an important force after a year of neglect, and the Likud took over corrupt labor, still recovering from the shock of the Yom Kippur War. And since then, Beitar still had to play at the YMCA, which was not fit for purpose, too small, too primitive, in the middle of the town with hardly, I guess, only 4,000 or even less places for fans. And they couldn't break through. They finished second on 3 or 4 events. And the first time they had a real go at the title, or managed to win the title, was when they played in Tel Aviv for the first time for the whole season in Bloomfield Stadium. They could earn much more money and play in front of bigger crowds, enjoy bigger support, and something unusual happened. They had more national support than local support in Jerusalem, which was wonderful when you're playing away, or when you're playing in Tel Aviv era, but it led to some unhealthy consequences around today. But Beitar always was a nationalistic club, taking the inspiration from Begin and his comrades and politicians who always run the club. If you worked for Beitar Jerusalem, it was a wonderful stepping stone into politics. Many of the chairmen became ministers, members of the Knesset, prime minister like Olmert, or president like Mr. Rivlin. But still, Beitar managed those years in the 80s and 90s to find the right balance between being political but not overstepping it. If you could enjoy the football and have different views and not feeling like an outsider during Beitar games, in a certain degree, let's say. It all changed in years to come, and Beitar became important force, especially in the 90s, winning 3 titles that decade. And I remember going to see Beitar game at the new Teddy Stadium, which at the time was modern and felt like a proper home stadium, which gave the team much more money and much more support in football-wise. So I remember watching games there, being on the pitch level and looking to my right and seeing half the government, few generals of the IDF, important politicians and wannabes and celebrities. The club was on the verge of becoming the most dominant club in Israeli football or Israeli sport. So what went wrong, actually? It all connected to major events in the 90s. In 1993, Israel, under Prime Minister Rabin, started negotiating with the PLO and established the Oslo Accords for future peace treaty. And it was followed by terrorist attacks of Hamas in the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Well, all over Israel, but mainly Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And I can tell you, when you hear it, I wasn't very close to it, but I heard 2 events, and you don't forget it. It's a sound that still rings in your ears many, many years after it. And life in Jerusalem were hard. People were afraid to go out, afraid to drive near buses, afraid to take the buses, being mortified when the children went on the buses. And it turned from bad to worse when Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish student in 1995. Netanyahu, a year later, came to power, and actually the whole Oslo peace process was off the rails. Not completely yet, that happened in 2000, but practically it was the end of it. There was another event, the rise of Arab-Israeli football. Hapoel Taibe were the first Arab team to play in the first league, and suddenly Beitar fans, angry about the Oslo process and about the terror attacks, had somebody to hate in arm length. Again, I was on the pitch in a game at Teddy Stadium against Taibe, and it wasn't pretty. The hatred and the chants and the spitting and the venom was something that shook me as an Israeli. And in the middle of it, I remember hearing somebody calling my voice, Shaul, Shaul, Manyanim, what's going on? And for 1 second, I thought I heard wrong, but I turned away and met two people that I knew from working in Jerusalem. Very nice Beitar fans that I always was happy to talk on lunch breaks, happy to talk with them and learn about the teams and about mood among the fans. And then a minute later, you could see them joining the singing and the chanting of Death to the Arabs and other chants that at that period were still not very, not a lot of them, and very basic. In years to come, they become much more disturbing and as an Israeli, disgusting. So those years, Beitar forged the new identity of Arab-hating club, Hapoel Tel Aviv hating club due to a title chase. And one important thing happened. When all other Israeli clubs enjoyed the talents of Arab Israeli players who came over from until the 70s, there were very few of them, but in the 90s there were more and more, and today we can see they are about the same representation of the 20% of the general population. Beitar never took an Arab Israeli player. There were few Muslim players, but in very short time, a policy was forged or forced upon by the fans of not taking Muslim players, and especially not having Arab players. Things accelerated in the 2000s when the second Intifada happened and the streets of Israel were washed with blood. Life in Jerusalem and Israel were extremely tough, and horrible events took over, and the political identity of the fans escalated even more. That time, with the fans forum and all the new technology, they managed to form new groups of fans, very organized fan groups, ultras, if you want. And one of them, after evolution of few other ultras, were La Familia, who very shortly took over the main stand, intimidated more moderate fans, and made clear that anybody who dared to cross the line will be out of that part of the stadium, and maybe will have to watch over his back for retaliation. Things came to a head in 2013 when the owner, Arkady Gaidamak, signed two Chechen players for reasons that we don't know. I guess that he wanted to make ways to more political connections in Russia and with Putin, and Chechnya, which now is the private army of Putin in Ukraine, was the right path. And Beitar played a bizarre friendly game with a fixed result, a draw, of course, and in Grozny. And the manager was ordered to pick two players. And when the owner tells you to pick two players, you pick them. One of them was a very good player. The other one was too young and fragile. But Jerusalem lost it, to say the least. The fans, La Familia fans, made clear that it's unacceptable. They wouldn't have Muslim players in the team, and turned every game and training session into violent affair. intimidating other players, the manager, and mainly the chairman, Kornfein, who is a remarkable and excellent ex-player, but also a chairman that kept the club alive during tough times. Things reached a climax in the first game after the news broke out, when La Familia put a huge banner in the stand saying Beitar forever pure. It was clear what they say. By pure, they meant Jews or a club with no Arab or Muslim players ever. The Nazi connotation was clear and obvious. Israel was appalled, and so sponsors and anybody who had any business with Beitar. I spoke to one of the managers of Beitar, the marketing director, and he said that he signed a sponsorship deal with somebody a week before. And when that banner was raised, that guy stood up, left the stadium and said, Yossi, you're a nice guy. I do like Beitar, but I can't have business with you, not with such fans. And this is how Beitar came to be what they are today. A toxic brand that owners and companies big international companies stay away from them. Since then, Beitar is back to almost pre-1948 days. Not that important club. They once in a while have a decent season, but every 2 to 3 years facing administration and waiting for a new messiah to come and save them, only to turn out to be a bizarre person, sometimes with big mental issues, or a crook, or somebody who wants to take the club for a ride and make money out of them. Usually with the whole national event and feelings and Beitar are being used by the Likud on weekly basis, but and they are supposed to represent Israel, and in their eyes they do. So at a certain point, it goes up to the head of most owners and chairmen who start to believe that they are more important than any other club, and they're more privileged because they are from Jerusalem. But the sad truth is the decline of Beitar is the decline of Jerusalem. The city is now half or nearly half Palestinians. The huge proportion are Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox, and religion, and most of them don't care about football, not in the numbers of non-religious Israeli or more traditional Israeli. And the city is extremely poor, run down, and suffering from transportation into and out the city, and no reliable trains after, I think, 8 o'clock or something like that. And as I mentioned, most Beitar fans are not from the city. They live all around Israel, so it's extremely hard for them to make it to Jerusalem for home games. And Beitar playing in a big 32,000 dusty Teddy Stadium in front of 5,000 people. Many of them, too many of them, are racist, and the normative Beitar-loving racism-hating fans are pushed away. The club, I spoke to somebody who knows the numbers, and I said to him, but Beitar is such a big club, they always can survive. And he said, they're not a big club anymore. The numbers are quite clear. the number of people who buys tickets, who attend games, who buy merchandise is on a decline. And there's a lesson for you. If you use the club as a political tool, let the Likud and extremists like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's a ultra right-wing Kahana disciple politician, and his ilk like Miri Regev, the former Minister for Education, and inciting hate against anything who is not Benjamin Netanyahu, you will pay the price. You'll drive away fans that just want to see football. You'll drive away fans who have more moderate views, and you drive away people who just want 2 hours of escapism. There's enough politics, hate, religion, nationalism, Israeli-Arab conflict every day in Israel. There's no shortage of it. And Beitar failed to recognize that fact, let the big politicians do whatever they want with the shell of a football club. And today it led to bizarre events like when that prince from the UAE was supposed to buy the club. In a matter of days, I think 2 or 3 days, the Israeli press did a good job and found out that all of his supposed money was in Venezuelan stock bonds, i.e. nothing. He couldn't support the club, and it didn't make the first hurdle. Since then, Beitar were looking for somebody to save them from the corrupt or from the under suspicion owner, and managed to just squeeze a deal in the last minute last week, which only time will tell the nature of it. So there you go. In 1997, Beitar were on the verge of becoming the most powerful football club in Israel, and today they're just happy to survive in the first team, in the first league. And that's the part of the decline.
Thank you so much, Shaul. What a fascinating insight into a club I'm sure all our audience have heard of, but probably few, if any of us, know all the detail that you've gone into. What's the relationship with the club and politicians now? Are there people in power or near to power who are still sort of flying the flag, as it were?
Yeah, but before elections, and as we all know, elections are not extremely rare event in Israel. It's an annual event or tri-annual event. You'll see Bibi Netanyahu going there to milk some adoration from his fans. But when Beitar was struggling and really on the brink of extinction, all the politicians, Netanyahu and Regev and Ben-Gvir, couldn't help the club or didn't show in numbers, or they made few phone calls, but I can't see anything. And the moderate fans are angry at the politicians, but it's a bit too late after so many years when politicians were happy to being photographed, especially before big games against the leading Arab-Israeli team of Bnei Sachnin. It's one-sided. The club is used, and but I think next time Netanyahu will show his face at Teddy, the welcome is not going to be so warm.
Just to remind our audience, if you do have questions for Shaul, we do have a few minutes left, so please type those into the Q&A now. We have a question from Philip Cohen. He says, have any sanctions ever been imposed on Beitar by the Israeli Football Association? And if not, why not? He says in some other countries they would have been closed down. He's also interested to know which club you support.
Well, I'm happy to say that I support Hapoel Be'er Sheva. 3 titles in a row in the last few years, cup holders. And since 2013, I think we had around 30 games against Beitar. All of them victories, 1 defeat. So yeah, I'm Be'er Sheva born and bred. If you type my name and write Shaul Adar Hapoel Be'er Sheva, you'll find very interesting piece at The Guardian, which I do recommend. That one is about love and devotion and connection to the club, not about racism. Beitar and the Israeli FA and few chairmen, especially it's a confine which I respect a lot, try to fight the racism, and Beitar been punished by financially playing without crowd, away from Jerusalem, to no avail. The problem is far bigger than one that the FA can deal with it. They need the help. I'm quoting the former chairman Confine. We need the help of the police, the courts, and the state. And none of them came to help Beitar in 2013 or ever since. La Familia are spreading terror in the stadium, especially against their own fans. There was a Muslim player from Ghana last season, played half a season, and fans who dared to support him were beaten massive, in terrible, shocking event. There is a constant struggle, but it's not enough, and the Israeli FA are doing the best, but they need something like the post-Hillsborough reform that happened in here. Something that would give anti-football violence unit some forces, some powers to keep people away from the grounds or to ban them for 10 years. It doesn't happen for many legal reasons, and I can't see it happens under this current regime, which is much more friendly to La Familia than previous one.
We have a question from Jonathan Rosenthal. He says football clubs attract racism all over the world. And he said it was noticeable at the European Athletics Championships recently in Munich that Israel was represented and won medals with Black African athletes. He's interested to know how widespread racism is in other Israeli sports.
I'll speak about football. If we look at the national team, half of it is non-Jewish. There are Christian players who came as foreign players and became Israeli. There are many Arab players. There is one Circassian player. There were Arab Christian players over the years. It's not an issue, or in most cases, it's not an issue. Israeli football is open and inclusive and is based on merit. If you're a good enough player, you will make it to the national team. So it's a wonderful example. I know about its limitations, but I'm a big fan of Israeli football as a social power. And that makes Beitar much more unique and outstanding. They're not part of that movement. And actually, that's the way that they could rid themselves of the racists. They need to sign few excellent Arab Israeli players, let the racists leave the club. They need full support of the police, courts and the Israeli League in doing so, because it will bring trouble and some angry fans. But once they'll do it, it will be a brave new day. I don't know how many people among them want it. That's a question that we can only guess or assume, and until it happens. But if it won't happen, they will dwindle more and more.
Now, this I understand this is your third book. Are the other two also about football? Are they in English?
Yeah, no, they're both in Hebrew. The first one is about Liverpool Football Club. I wrote about the Israeli connection, mainly Ronnie Rosenthal, and wrote a lot about the Hillsborough disaster, which I recognized as the key event in the club identity. And then after our wonderful golden time at Beersheva, I wrote a book about Hapoel Beersheva, which was a labor of love, of course.
And do you have another book in the pipeline?
It won't be about football, I think.
Oh, really?
I'm looking for a new subject, probably maybe a travel book.
Okay, well, when you finish that, do come and tell us all about it. Shaul, it's been a pleasure to have you on Milim this evening. If you want to buy Shaul's book, we'll put a link on the follow-up email tomorrow. If you use that, it will help Milim with a few pennies a copy, but the book is available elsewhere, and it is an interesting read. And to say thank you, Shaul, we'll send you some of my photographs. This is Magen David Adom in action. In fact, the picture on the cover was taken in Beersheva, in an ambulance there. So hopefully you'll enjoy having a look. Now, just a few words about our upcoming program before we leave you. We're off next Monday as it's a bank holiday, but back the week after on the 5th of September with Jonathan Sandler. He's discussing his graphic novel, The English GI, which is well worth looking at. It tells a story about how his grandfather was away on a school trip in the USA when the Second World War broke out. Not only was he stranded there, but eventually ended up being called up to fight in the American Army. And if all goes to plan, I will be hosting that broadcast from Haifa. So hopefully see you there. And then on the 19th of September, we've got the former MP Peter Bradley. He's discussing his book, The Last Train. We have many more amazing speakers coming up, so please do visit our website at milim.org.uk to book your tickets, sign up for our newsletter, and that way you'll be sure not to miss anything. All of our events are free, but you can make a donation to help with the costs of putting on these events. You'll see a link in the chat or find it on our website. It remains for me to thank our guest Shaul Adar once again. Thank you so much, Shaul.
Thanks, John.
And I'm looking forward to seeing you all at a future event. Until then, stay safe. See you soon.
Cheers.